The wind, howling through Devil's Anchorage, tearing across the docks like it's chasing something it can't forget. A girl, barefoot, soaked in seawater and shivering, steps out of the mist. She's no older than 16, but in her eyes is the kind of terror you don't get from storms or men. She collapses at the feet of a shadow watching from the pier, a shadow with a name that still haunts the sea, Blackbeard. What was she running from? A man? A curse? Or something older, something that followed her? And from the deep, this isn't just another pirate story. This is a confession, a secret torn from the pages of a diary no sailor was meant to read. A tale of betrayal among brothers, of a girl no one knew, and a silence so heavy it nearly sank the ship. Welcome to the channel, The Pirate's Diary. If tales of pirates, lost oaths, and cursed gold stir something in you, the sea keeps its stories, but only for those who dare to remember. Will you join the crew? Subscribe and step aboard. They pulled her from the wreck like a ghost snagged in a net, not screaming, not weeping, just watching. Salt clung to her like a second skin, and her hair smelled of rotting kelp. She didn't say a word, not on the first night, nor the second. Not even when the crew began whispering behind her back, their eyes darting toward the shadows whenever the ship groaned too loud. They gave her a name that felt safer than silence. Mara. No one knew where she came from. She had no papers, no family, no memory, or at least none she offered. But there was something about her, something that made even the parrots quiet when she passed. They said her eyes were too still, that her breath didn't mist in the cold, that her feet left no prints on the wet deck. The cook said she was just mad, but One-Eyed Roger swore he'd seen her drinking rainwater through her hands, hands that under the moonlight looked webbed like a creature from the deep. Others claimed she talked in her sleep, whispering names no one aboard had ever heard, and begging something to stay beneath the waves. Blackbeard didn't believe in tales, at least that's what he always said. But I remember the way he looked at her, not like a man studying a mystery, but like someone recognizing something he'd buried long ago. He gave her no chains, no questions, just a place, deep in the hold, where light never touched and the wood still smelled of the men who never came back from the last voyage. Every night, when the lanterns were doused and the laughter faded, someone would find her down there, curled in the corner, her finger dipped in seawater, drawing symbols onto the planks, symbols that shimmered briefly, as if the ship itself remembered them. And we all heard it, the echo of her breath, soft and rhythmic, like waves inside a coffin. It was De Soto who first understood. The old carpenter had scars down his neck from a storm he never spoke of, and eyes that had seen pyramids hidden beneath jungle vines. He knelt by her one morning, watching her fingers trace that forgotten alphabet across the boards. Mayan, he whispered, prayers for the drowned. After that, none of us slept easy. Storms came without warning. The compass spun itself into madness. Rats ran from the hold and flung themselves into the sea. Men heard their names called in voices that hadn't spoken in years, and Mara remained, silent, unshaken, waiting. One night, I made the mistake of asking her why she was still aboard. Her eyes turned to me, not with anger, not even sadness, but with something colder than the deepest trench. She said just one thing: "You brought me here. Now you carry the weight." I still don't know what she meant, but that night, De Soto vanished. We searched from bow to stern. No blood, no broken rail, just his hammer lying beside her cymbals, soaked through with seawater, though the decks were dry. The next day, Blackbeard gave the order. No one was to enter the hold again, not even him. We sealed it with iron nails and salt, but we still heard the breathing, slow, measured, not hers alone. Something else had come aboard, something she'd whispered to life in that darkness, a memory from below the tides. a voice that answered the Mayan prayers. Some say she was a witch, others say she was the last daughter of some drowned kingdom. Me? I think she was just a girl who'd seen too much, and maybe we were the ones cursed, not by her, but by our own decision to let her live. I left that ship years ago, but still dream of the hold, of those symbols glowing in salt, of De Soto's hammer, of her voice, and sometimes I wake to find my floor wet with seawater. Blackbeard never spoke of her again, but his journals, the ones he burned before Nassau, they say one thing in the margins, scratched deep into the leather. We took something the sea wasn't ready to give, and it's still looking for us. By the time we reached Fort Bastion, the sun had already lost its warmth. It hung low and sickly, veiled. Behind clouds thick with smoke from a dozen smouldering chimneys, the Queen Anne's Revenge creaked into the dock like a beast returning to a place it once called home, though no one aboard dared say it aloud. Fort Bastion had a stench to it, not of the sea, but of old things left to rot, lies too stubborn to die, and secrets soaked into the stone. Blackbeard gave the order without looking back. Gather powder and rum, then be gone before the wind shifts. But the wind had already turned. We just didn't feel it yet. Marat hadn't spoken in days. Since De Soto vanished, she'd barely touched food. She sat alone on deck, tracing invisible runes on her arms, her eyes locked on the horizon, like she could see something coming we couldn't. But as the fort came into view, its crumbling walls crowned by a governor's manor too proud for its own shadow, she stood, her breath caught, her face turned pale as bone. She pointed. No words, just a trembling finger aimed straight at that manor on the hill. That night, the crew drank louder than usual, trying to drown the silence she left behind. Blackbeard stayed in his cabin. The candles inside burned long past midnight, casting restless shapes across the deck. And then, just before dawn, Marat appeared at his door. She didn't knock. She stood there shaking, her hands clenched so tightly the skin had gone white. Her voice, when it came, sounded like it had clawed its way from the bottom of the sea. "He's here," she said. "The man who took everything." Blackbeard didn't answer. He just looked at her, long and hard, like he was trying to see through her bones and into whatever past still held her hostage. And maybe in that moment he remembered something of his own, some debt he never paid, some face he buried under gunpowder and ash. He called for me at first light, told me to keep the crew aboard, said if he wasn't back by nightfall, burn the dock and leave the fort to sink in its own smoke. Then he went, alone. We waited. Hours passed, the fort silent. No bells, no soldiers, just birds circling above the manor like they were waiting for someone to fall. Marat never moved. She sat at the edge of the ship, eyes fixed on that hill, whispering prayers in the old tongue. Her fingers bled from the symbols she carved into the deck, but she didn't stop, not once. When Blackbeard returned, the sky had gone red. He didn't speak. He didn't look at us. His coat was torn, and the smoke that clung to him smelled not of fire, but of memory, of something burned from within. He carried no rum, no powder, just a single gold medallion, old and worn, the crest of some forgotten house now buried beneath Fort Bastion's ash. That night, the manor collapsed. Flames swallowed the hilltop, silent and strange, as if the fire had no hunger, only purpose. No soldiers came running, no townsfolk screamed. The fort remained still, as if it had expected this all along. Later, Marat told me the man's name, though I won't speak it. Here. She said he came for her village when she was still a child, took her kin, burned their dead to silence the gods. She remembered his boots more than his face, black leather never stained, not even by the blood of the priests. She said he spoke like he was above the sea, like it obeyed him, but he wasn't above it, not anymore. Whatever Blackbeard did inside that manor, it wasn't justice, it wasn't revenge, it was something older, a reckoning. And when the smoke finally cleared, all that was left was the silence. A silence heavy enough to sink ships, a silence Blackbeard carried with him until his final breath. Some say Fort Bastion still stands, but if you go there now, all you'll find is ash. And maybe, if the wind's right, the sound of a girl's whisper, soft and steady, he's gone, but the sea remembers. And believe me, it always does. Night came like a lid over the sky, sealing in the heat, the smoke, and the stench of something old and spoiled. Fort Bastion didn't sleep. It watched. From its broken windows and torchlit towers, it remembered. And that night, it watched Blackbeard move through its alleys like a shadow that had waited too long to settle its score. He took only 3 men, no loud boots, no clashing steel, just silence and something heavier than revenge in his stride. I followed at a distance, too far to help, too close to forget. The alleys were thick with rot and whispers, but Blackbeard didn't slow. He moved like he already knew the way, as if he'd been here before, or as if something older had drawn a map into his bones. The governor's manor loomed above the square, its balcony sagging over the courtyard like a crooked jaw. Lanterns flickered behind stained-glass windows, painting the night in wine red and gold. Inside, the man who ruled this island, once a commodore of the Royal Navy, now just a swollen shadow of power, was drowning in his own illusions. He sat alone, wineglass in hand, shirt open, pistol resting beside his. Fingers like a pet he no longer feared. He didn't rise when Blackbeard entered, didn't even blink, just grinned, half drunk and full of ghosts. "She belongs to me," he slurred, his voice slick with pride. "Like the island, like the sea." And that's when I saw her, Mara, standing behind the balcony columns, half hidden in the flicker of torchlight. She said nothing, just stared. Her eyes weren't crying, they weren't angry. They were still, like something at the bottom of the ocean, watching the surface fall apart. Blackbeard didn't speak either. He didn't argue, didn't threaten. He just stepped forward and ended it. The blade flashed once, quick, quiet, merciful only in its silence. The man never saw it coming. One breath, then none. A splash of red on ivory stone, a chair tipping, a glass shattering without sound, and Mara. She didn't look away. The flames started an hour later. Some say it was sabotage. Others say it was the governor's own men, afraid of what they'd seen. But I think it was her, not by hand, by presence. The fire knew. It climbed the manor like a tide, swallowing walls, tapestries, and the governor's precious maps. And above it all stood Mara, her face lit by the blaze, her shadow stretching long behind her, as if the fire itself had grown a spine. Blackbeard returned to the ship without a word. His men didn't ask. They saw the smoke. They smelled what had burned. No one spoke her name that night, not even him. But in the days that followed, the crew began, leaving offerings by her hammock, bits of silver, salt, broken coins, things sailors give to spirits they don't understand but fear just enough. And from the hold, the humming returned, low, steady, ancient, like something that had finally been answered, or released. They buried what was left of the governor just before dawn, in the pale silence of low tide. The crew dug with their hands, no prayers, no stone, just sand and salt, and the kind of fear that made men glance over their shoulders. Without knowing why, Blackbeard stood nearby, arms crossed, his face unreadable as ever. When they laid the body down, the sea should have come to take it. But it didn't. The tide never rose. It stayed low, frozen like glass. Not a ripple, not a pull, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. When morning came, the harbour looked broken. Still water, dead fish bobbing like coins on a drowned altar. The air held a sour weight, and the gulls that usually screamed above the masts were nowhere to be seen. No birds, no wind, no sound. Men whispered behind their sleeves about curses, about sea witches, about spirits that don't stay buried when justice comes too late. One-eyed Roger swore the sand near the grave was warm, though the morning was cold. Others refused to go near the shoreline at all. They said they heard whispers there, calling them by name. And Mara. She walked to the beach barefoot, carrying nothing but a jagged piece of coral in her hand. No one stopped her. They just watched, like they couldn't move, like they shouldn't. She knelt where the tide should have reached, eyes half-lidded, and began to draw a circle in the sand. Not random, not idle. Each mark was precise, careful, like she'd done it before. Symbols followed, sharp, angular, ancient. Then came the words. Soft, nearly lost to the wind, but the kind of sound that sticks in your mind long after it ends. It wasn't English, it wasn't Spanish, it wasn't anything known, but it felt real, felt old. Blackbeard watched from the bluff above, saying nothing, but his hand rested on the hilt of his blade, not from fear of her, but of whatever might answer. That night, the crew gathered around the barrels, desperate for warmth and drink. The storm had passed, but no one sang. No dice hit the table, just the slow, steady silence of men trying to forget. Someone opened a barrel of rum, then spat it out, choking. It tasted of brine, salt, and rot, as if the sea had crept inside while no one was looking. By morning, half the rum had turned, cloudy, bitter, undrinkable. The cook claimed it was spoiled. The boatswain said it was a trick. But Blackbeard, he only stared at the sea. Drunk or not, his instincts were sharpened by ghosts. He'd known the ocean his whole life, had seen it devour fleets and swallow whole islands. But this was different. The water was watching. The hold began to creak at night, even when the wind was still. Rats vanished. Mara no longer hummed. She just sat in her hammock, fingers stained with sand and coral dust, her eyes unfocused like she was listening to something beneath the waves, something that was getting closer. And the men, they began to dream again. Not of gold or women or the ports they'd lost, but of deep places, cold and black, of footsteps on wet decks, of whispers in a language they didn't speak but somehow understood. No one returned to the burial site, not even Blackbeard, and the tide never rose. By the time we sighted Isla Vela, the sea had already taken 3 of us, not in battle, not in storm, but in silence. The first vanished during a night shift, lantern still swinging, rope in hand, no trace but a single boot near the helm. The second went below deck and never came back up. His bunk was cold, but his knife lay on the floor, bent like it had been crushed under a weight no man could carry. The third, we found him at dawn, tangled in the rigging above the foremast, twisted like a rag, and his throat caved in, not sliced, not pierced, crushed as if by the hand of something not human. No one said his name. We cut him down, buried him at sea, and no one watched the waves. Blackbeard didn't speak for most of that day. He stood at the bow like he was trying to read the horizon, as if whatever haunted us had left tracks across the clouds. But that night, after the bells, he summoned her, Mara. She climbed to the main deck barefoot, wrapped in a shawl that dripped with sea mist even though the air was dry. The crew stepped back, not out of respect, out of something colder. They'd stopped meeting her eyes days ago, as if whatever lived behind them could see through skin and bone. She stood before Blackbeard without flinching, her face calm as still water. He asked one question, not with fury, not with fear, just quiet dread. "What are you?" Her silence lasted a lifetime. Then she spoke and the wind died with her words. "I am what he made me." That was all, but the way she said it, it didn't sound like Confession. It sounded like judgment, and for the first time I saw Blackbeard hesitate, just for a breath, just long enough to make the sky feel heavier. That night no stars showed. The Queen Anne's Revenge rocked on an ocean that felt too still, too warm, like it was waiting for something to surface. Lanterns flickered out one by one, though no wind touched them. A fog rolled in, not from the shore, but from beneath the ship, curling up the sides like smoke from an unseen fire. And then we heard it, a sound that didn't belong to man or beast, a low, throbbing breath, a whisper made of teeth. I ran to the rail and looked out, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw it, a shape beneath the water, massive and slow. But it wasn't the size that chilled me. It was the eyes, two flames burning through the dark. It had returned. Mara stood at the stern, eyes closed, arms at her sides, as if she'd known this moment would come, as if she'd called it. The crew screamed, some dropped to their knees, others gripped their blades like toys, knowing they were useless. And Blackbeard, he didn't move, he just watched her. No one remembers exactly what happened next. Some say the thing passed beneath us and left. Others say it climbed aboard and walked the deck in silence. All I know is that when morning came, Mara was gone. No boat missing, no splash in the night. Just her shawl, folded neatly at the helm. And on the deck beneath it, drawn in seawater. The same circle she carved in the sand at Fort Bastion, and the flame-eyed presence. It wasn't gone. It had only begun to remember us. By the time we reached Isla Vela, the crew was already unraveling. The map said it was just another speck of jungle and stone, uncharted, forgotten. But the sea knew better. It pulled harder around that place. The air grew thick, and the stars above flickered like they wanted to look away. 3 men were gone, not dead, just gone. One left behind only his boots. Another vanished mid-watch, his lantern still swinging from the mast. The third we found tangled in the rigging, limbs stiff, eyes wide open, throat crushed like it had been caught in a giant's fist. No blood, no scream, just that look on his face, the kind that makes you start praying again, even if you forgot how. Blackbeard called no meeting. He just stood at the helm longer than usual, eyes fixed on the tree line as the island crept closer, sails groaning above. He was a man who had stared down fleets and outdrunk fate, but that night, I swear, his hands trembled. Then he gave the order, "Bring her to the deck." They found Mara in the hold, sitting among bones of fish that hadn't been caught. She didn't resist, didn't ask why, just followed them through the lantern light, bare feet silent on the boards. The crew parted around her like shadows around flame. When she stood before Blackbeard, the ship fell silent. Even the gulls above went still. "What are you?" he asked, not with anger, but with something older, a kind of awe or fear. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Then came her voice, quiet, hollow, deep as the ocean. "I am what he made me." She didn't say who he was. She didn't need to. Blackbeard stepped back, just once, but we saw it. The uncertainty, the doubt, the weight of years finally pressing against the one man we thought untouchable. That night, the galley caught fire. No spark, no powder, no fight, just flames, rising from within, licking the beams, swallowing rope and iron, as if the ship itself had finally turned against us. Screams followed, not from pain, but from confusion. Men running with buckets of seawater that hissed against fire that shouldn't have been there, and in the middle of it, she walked. Mara. Through smoke and flame, her hair untouched, her skin clean, her eyes glowing not with madness, but memory. She moved like someone who'd done this before, like she was born from fire, not burned by it. Around her the ship groaned and splintered, but she kept walking, and behind her a whisper echoed through the hull, not hers, not ours, something deeper, something that called itself home. By morning, the fire was gone. The galley charred, the sails blackened with soot, but the Queen Anne's Revenge still floated, still breathing, like it had to witness what came next. Blackbeard said nothing for the rest of the day. He didn't ask for repairs, didn't shout orders. He just stood by the rail, watching the horizon, hands clenched. Some say the girl was cursed, others say she was a reckoning, but I think she was the last ember of a fire we were never meant to carry, and Isla Vela still waits. The sea had turned quiet, not calm, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm or after something's been buried too deep. Blackbeard stood in his cabin, hunched over a chest no one was meant to open. The hinges groaned when he broke the last seal, fingers slow, as if each layer pulled at something he'd tried to forget. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and time, was a scroll. The parchment smelled of old bones and burning oil. He didn't touch it right away, just stared. The ink had faded, but the symbol in the center was clear. A crooked spiral surrounded by jagged lines, the same one Mara had carved into the deck weeks earlier with her coral shard. It hadn't faded. In fact, the wood around it had darkened, as if it had started to rot from the inside out. Blackbeard's jaw tightened. "De Soto," he called, voice low. The old carpenter shuffled in, eyes hollow from too many dreams. He took one look at the scroll and paled. "I've seen that mark," he whispered, "etched into temple stone, deep jungle, place the guides wouldn't enter. They said it belonged to something that sleeps beneath sand." Blackbeard didn't blink. "How old?" De Soto swallowed hard. "Older than Empire." The room fell still. Outside, the crew moved slowly, haunted by smoke and silence. The Queen Anne's Revenge had begun to change, boards creaking without wind, sails twitching even when furled. Some said the ship breathed differently now. Blackbeard rolled the scroll open. There was no treasure map, no compass rose, just a crude drawing of an island, long, thin, surrounded by jagged reefs and marked only with one name, scrawled in blood-colored ink, Isla del Olvido. He stared at it for a long time. The name stirred something dark in the air, as if the sea itself didn't. Like being reminded, legends said it was a place that rose and sank with the moon, swallowed by the ocean each time it was remembered. No flag flew there, no port claimed it. Men who sailed toward it didn't come back, not always because they died, but because they forgot how to return. Blackbeard looked up at the horizon, then down at the scroll again. His eyes weren't angry. They were resigned, like a man rereading a story he already knew the ending to. Set a course. No one questioned him. Not after what had happened in the galley. Not after Mara walked through flame and whispered names into the wood that made the hull groan in its sleep. We turned west, past the edge of the usual routes, toward a sky that seemed to bend unnaturally low. The stars looked different out there, closer but colder. And the water, it turned black. Not blue, not green, just black, as if the sea had bled into itself. Salt gathered on the railings, thick and bitter. Not white like the ocean's edge, but dark, almost grey, like ash mixed into snow. The crew scraped it off with knives, but it always came back by morning, covering the deck like a warning. And every night, Mara stood at the bow, her eyes locked on the waves ahead, lips moving in silence. Some say she was guiding us. Others said she was calling it up. And Blackbeard, he stayed in his cabin more often, the scroll never far from his hand. I once heard him muttering to it, not reading, but remembering, as if he hadn't just found it, as if he'd written it long ago. The island did not greet them, it remembered. From the moment the Queen Anne's Revenge scraped against the jagged reef and cast anchor in shallow black water, the air felt different, thicker, like breath caught in a throat. The trees stood too still. The branches didn't sway. The jungle pulsed with a rhythm none of them could match. It was not wind that moved through that place. It was memory. They landed at dusk. The sky above Isla del Olvido hung low and bruised, and the shore was veiled in mist that never quite touched the sand. Mara was the first to step ashore, barefoot, unblinking, her face lit by a softness that didn't belong to this world. Thorns tore at her feet, but she didn't bleed. She moved with purpose, deeper into the green, like the island wanted her back. No one spoke. Blackbeard followed close behind, sword at his hip, hand never leaving the hilt. I saw something in his eyes I never thought I would. Restraint, not caution, not fear. Respect. Like a man walking through the remains of a cathedral he once burned down. The others hung back, blades ready but unsure what enemy they were preparing for. The path vanished after 10 paces. The roots coiled like limbs reaching for the sun, and vines hung heavy with flowers that seemed to sigh when touched. It felt alive, and not in the way life comforts. It watched. After nearly an hour, they reached a clearing. At its center, a cenote shrouded in steam, its mouth wide and still as glass. No frogs, no birds, just the smell of iron, damp stone, and something older than death. Mara stopped at the edge, her shoulders stiffened. "This is where they broke me," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, it bled. "This is where I buried him. No grave, no bones, just water, dark, unmoving, as if waiting for the right name to be spoken." She dropped to her knees. Blackbeard stepped forward, but didn't interrupt. He stood beneath the twisted trees like a witness, not a captain. The crew lingered, beyond the brush, too frightened to breathe, and then Mara whispered. Her words were slow, like each one pulled a thread from her spine. They weren't words meant for men. They were for the water, for the vines, for the island itself. The cenote rippled, not like rain or wind, but like something underneath had shifted. A shape surfaced, slow, deliberate, wrong. Not a man, not a god, a memory given teeth. It had no face, but it stared. It had no breath, but it hungered. It did not rise to threaten. It rose because it had been called. Blackbeard took a single step back. Mara did not. She looked into the thing, into what had once been part of her, and nodded. Not in peace, not in forgiveness, in recognition, because the island remembered. And so did she. It didn't speak with a voice, it spoke with storms. The air shattered above the cenote, thunder rolling through the jungle like a curse torn loose. The water churned as if the sea itself had been dropped into that ancient pit, rising in twisted waves that never spilled, only circled, waiting. The thing Mara had called from the depths wanted something. It always had. The crew fell to their knees, some weeping, others too hollow to make a sound. Lightning split the canopy. Trees caught fire without flame. Birds flew into the sky and vanished mid-flight. It wasn't just the shape in the water now, it was the weight behind it. Everything the ocean had ever taken, gathered in one impossible form, and it demanded a price. Blackbeard stepped forward, soaked in rain, coat plastered to his back, eyes hard with memory. The mist clung to his skin like smoke from a battlefield. He didn't flinch, didn't tremble. He faced the creature and said only this, "Take me." His voice cut through the chaos. Not a shout, a sentence, final. Let her walk free. For a moment, the world stood still. Then the thing laughed. It was not a sound. It was every scream lost to the sea, every sailor who went down clutching nothing but silence. The cenote, bubbled dark hands rising from the foam like memories given form. The smell of brine turned to rot. The pressure in the air grew until ribs ached and thoughts fractured. And then Mara stepped forward. She pushed past Blackbeard, barefoot in the mud, face pale but sure. Her voice rose through the roar like a thread of light through black water. "No!" She stood between them, the captain and the curse, her body small, but her shadow long in the lightning. "He didn't save me out of guilt," she said. "He saved me because he remembers what it is to drown." And with that she raised her hand, slit her palm with a coral shard, the same one she had used to mark the deck weeks ago. Her blood hit the water like a bell, sharp, echoing, heard. The thing recoiled, shrieked, not in pain but in recognition, as if what she gave it wasn't sacrifice, but truth. It twisted, flailed, and then began to fold into itself, waves turning inward, mist collapsing. The trees moaned like they were exhaling after, holding their breath too long. The cenote surface stilled, its darkness swallowing the last ripple, and just like that, it was gone. No scream, no flash, just silence. The jungle exhaled. The tide moved again. Blackbeard said nothing. He looked at Mara, as if seeing her for the first time, not as a mystery, not as a burden, but as someone who had walked further into darkness than he ever had, and come back willingly. Later that night, as the crew set sail under a sky finally free of smoke, I saw Mara standing at the stern, her hand wrapped in linen, her eyes on the horizon. She wasn't smiling, but for the first time since we found her, she was breathing like someone who knew the sea could no longer take her. And Blackbeard? He lit no lantern. He left the helm to the winds and stared at the water like it still owed him something. They never spoke of it again, not the fire, not the island, not the thing that rose from the cenote with a memory too heavy to name. The sea demands silence. From those it spares, and they all obeyed. But Mara remained. She was no longer a stowaway, no longer something feared in hushed whispers or blamed when the wind died. She became part of the ship, of the crew, of the shadow that followed the Queen Anne's revenge through fog and flame. She worked without complaint, slept little, and kept to herself, but the men no longer avoided her. They watched her with quiet reverence, as if some part of them knew she'd stepped deeper into the abyss than any of them, and returned whole, but not untouched. Blackbeard never asked her why she wept in her sleep, never questioned the feathers she carved into driftwood with hands that never shook. But once, just once, when the fever gripped him hard and his breath ran shallow, she came to his side. No one called for her, no one told her where he lay. She simply appeared. She knelt beside him, pressed a hand to his chest, and whispered something none of us could understand. Not a prayer, not a spell. Something older, something the sea itself might have forgotten. And by morning the fever had broken. He never thanked her, and she never asked him to. Years passed. Ports changed. Men died or disappeared. But Mara stayed. When Blackbeard's name turned to shadow in every harbour, when the mention of the Queen Anne's revenge made even drunkards lower their voices, she was still there, eyes fixed on the horizon, never growing older, always waiting. There were stories in the back alleys of Nassau, whispers, shared between men too scared to drink alone. They spoke of a girl with salt in her veins who sailed with the devil, who kept his soul from shattering, who knew the sea's language and bargained with the darkness below. Some say she was never alive to begin with. Others say she gave her name to the water so that Blackbeard wouldn't lose his. But the truth sank with the last breath of the captain and the last creak of the Queen Anne's revenge. The ship was never found, not broken, not burned, not wrecked. It simply vanished, like it had always belonged to something else. And Mara, some say she walks the shoreline still, that if you hear waves crashing when the sea is calm, it's her voice, remembering the names the world tried to forget. Blackbeard lives now in fragments, in maps with no destination, in journals with pages torn out, in legends that taste of smoke and salt. He was never just a man. He became what every sailor fears and follows, a warning, a memory, a ghost. And those of us who survived, we carry it in silence. The weight, the choices, the cost. Some scars never fade, some names never reach shore. Did you already know this forgotten part of the story? And if you had been on that ship, what would you have done? What other sea stories deserve to be told here? If this story touched you in any way, don't let it vanish like so many other names the sea has taken. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep hearing what was never meant to be forgotten. This was the Pirate's Diary, and some echoes never stop.